Okay, so I think most people have connected, so we will start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I just have a few housekeeping notes before we start the webinar. We have muted all participants at the start of the webinar, but please keep your line muted to ensure everyone can hear the presentation throughout. Also, if you can please hold all of your questions until the end of the presentation. We have allotted time for a Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the WestCOG website a few days following the webinar. And thank you, that wraps up the housekeeping items. So first of all, I wanted to introduce who will be speaking today. First off, my name is Kristen Floberg, and I've been a planner with WestCOG for about 4 years now. And I'm joined today with my colleague, Charles Vidic, who is a senior project manager at WestCOG. We both served as the staff members for WestCOG's Land Use Planning for Wireless Telecommunications Task Force. The task force was created out of a recommendation in our Plan of Conservation and Development that was adopted earlier this year. The plan highlighted the importance of efficient communications and broadband services, the importance of that in the success of our businesses, residents, and students in the region. We also, while also balancing the changes coming to technology that will shift where and how communications infrastructure will be placed moving forward. Both of these factors moved this recommendation to the top of the priority list for the council to address. About this time last year, the Western Connecticut Council of Governments assembled a task force of municipal professionals that came from various different departments in quite a few of our municipalities in the region. They represented various areas such as planning from our operations departments, executive branch, town attorney, economic development. So they had a wide range of skills that had input going into this. Okay, there we go. Okay, so first, an overview of what we're going to be going through today. We're just going to touch on a few of the technical terms and then go through a broad overview of what fifth generation broadband is, go through some of the FCC regulatory developments, and then Charles will take over to discuss jurisdictional issues, and then go through the 4 strategic options that the task force has agreed upon. Okay, so here are some of the technical terms that we'll be referencing throughout the presentation. So some of the ones that I want to highlight is bit and megabits and gigabits per second. So a bit is a unit of measurement that quantifies computer data, and the megabits and gigabits per second is how fast that data transfer is actually going. And then you'll see here we also have SWF, which is a small wireless facility, one of the key terms that we'll be referencing throughout the presentation. Okay, so for the why is 5G being touted as a major change in broadband communications? So according to the American Decision Makers surveyed in 2018, the top 5 innovations they anticipated are going to be for smart grids, virtual reality experiences, improved emergency response, the Internet of Things, smart cities and homes, and enhanced industrial automation and safer autonomous vehicles. Okay, so this is a graph depicting the evolution of broadband services. Here you can see that the first generation of broadband started in 1981, and we've had a new generation of broadband every 10 years or so since then. So 40 years later, we are at 5G. But one thing to note here is that this is what most people think the changes in broadband have achieved, incremental changes over time that increase the speed. However, if you notice here that we have this in a logarithmic scale, so it actually is quite a bit of a different picture here. So here you can see the first generation broadband had 2 kilobits per second speeds. And over time, it's actually grown quite exponentially, where today for 5G internet, we're going to be seeing about 100 times the speeds as we are with 4G internet. Okay, so The goal of 5G is to achieve download speeds that jump from that 10 to 20 megabits per second to that 1 to 10 gigabits per second that we saw in the previous slide. The federal government is auctioning high frequency bandwidth to service providers to enable the 5G revolution. The auctions are a major cash cow for the federal government, resulting in hundreds of billions throughout the sale of ultra high frequency bandwidth. The FCC released new regulations in October 2018 that reduces these barriers for deployment. The new 5G technology depends on a clear line of sight from with distances limited to about 200 meters, more or less. So many of these new regulations ensure that state and local governments do not effectively prohibit 5G by making it infeasible. That's what we mean by that. So also, like I said before, 5G is expected to enable these investments in robotics, smart cities, and the Internet of Things. And that will be done with about 800,000 new small cell antennas across the United States. Okay, so the goal of the FCC was, sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay, so the FCC has released those new regulations in 2018, and we've summarized those into 6 different regulatory developments here. So the first being an aesthetic requirement that cannot be any more burdensome than those applied to other infrastructure deployments in town. So buildings, your street design, historic preservation, and those things. And recently, this actually was changed. So now you see that it's only a reasonable view shed. Before it was a reasonable and objective. A couple months ago, the Ninth Circuit Court removed objective as one of their design standards for small cells. So going on to the second set, so 3 and 4, is that it has to do with setting limited restrictive land use controls. So since wireless technology requires above ground access to 5G bandwidth, requiring underground installations is not allowed. So in some instances where minimum spacing requirements may effectively prohibit the deployment of 5G. So the last is these 2 that have to do with reducing the cost and time of 5G broadband. So I'm going to go over this shortly, but there is a shot clock concept that reduces the amount of time that municipalities have to review applications for this. And then it also limits broadband fees to what is actually reasonable for the use of putting new technology in the right of way. Okay, so a little bit more on shot clock review time limits. So this first part is the shot clock that the FCC put out in 2009 that governs towers and macro cells. So this is the 90-day shot clock for co-location of applications, co-location applications, and then 150 days for all other locations. And what is new as of 2019, when the 2018 regulations became effective, is that co-location applications were reduced to a 60-day shot clock for co-locations on pre-existing structures, and 90 days for any small cells that are attached to a new structure. Okay, so how does a shot clock work? And so basically all applicable permits must be approved or denied in that shot clock period. What makes this difficult is that there are permits that can cross various departments that you may not initially think of, because the application would come to the planning department, but it could also go to need permits for electrical permits, right-of-way permits, building permits, and those likely aren't in the planning department. So for example, a new small wireless facility that's co-located on an existing flagpole, the clock begins the day the application is received. And then another part of the shot clock is that you have 10 days to review the application to see if it is complete or not, and give notice if it is not complete. And then after that, you have 50 days to issue all of those permits depending on what is needed for your municipality. So what are the conditions that a small wireless facility must meet? So it has to be mounted on a structure that is 50 feet in height or less, and it cannot be more than 10% taller than any adjacent structures. The antenna part of the small wireless facilities cannot be more than 3 cubic feet. And then you're probably also wondering why we have a photo of a refrigerator on a sidewalk, and that is because small wireless facilities can also have associated equipment with them, and that must be limited to 28 cubic feet. And what we mean by that is that it can be up to 28 cubic feet, and that's about the size of a residential refrigerator, which can make things like, if it's placed near an intersection, it can make ADA sidewalk crossings not work anymore. You need to reconstruct that. It can affect sight distances and a whole host of other problems there. And then they also must meet the radio frequency radiations that the FCC has put out. Okay, so just a quick little snippet of some of the design impacts that we are seeing with 5G. So the top image is one of the, most people would say is probably one of the better designs for 5G. Where on the bottom, it looks like a whole bunch of Wi-Fi routers that are all attached to a pole that can look quite cluttered in your town. It can have you know, some negative impacts to the look of your streets. Okay, so this is a, sorry, I lost my place. So an important consideration in siting poles for 5G small cell facilities includes the compatibility of the pole design with the surrounding neighborhood. What are the prevailing design standards? What does that look like with existing pole locations? Are they on the same side of the street? So here we have put down, this is an excerpt from the National Capital Planning Commission's 2018 Guide to Small Wireless Facilities, where you can see they have quite a few different options here. So on the top, you can see this is the antenna, the small part of the small wireless facility. And on the bottom is where the auxiliary equipment that can be up to 28 cubic feet would be. So here the difference is that it would be underneath the pole, hidden. This part can be undergrounded because it's not an antenna, but it can also be placed on the pole if it's not feasible to go underground, or next to the pole, or as a pedestal like in this figure here. Okay, so tower and small cell locations in Western Connecticut as of 2019. So our group, before kind of coming together, we did an analysis on where towers and small cells are currently located in Western Connecticut. So you can, as many people think that most of these are located on towers or on utility poles, but the truth is that in our region, at least, rooftop applications make up the most common place to find a telecommunication facility. And the three most common are rooftops, monopoles, and utility poles, and they make up 58% of all of the locations in Western Connecticut. But some other ones to note for future parts of the presentation is that there are also telecommunications facilities that are on buildings, on water towers, on silos, and smokestacks. So these are other areas that you want to think about when regulating where and how the facility will look. So why is this important? Connecticut has experienced a shift away from telecommunications towers as the sole means of ensuring effective and dependable cell phone service. The result is that telecommunications towers are not the only way to provide the wall-to-wall service coverage at a municipal or regional level. It shifted more to a neighborhood-centric model where small cell antennas are being installed in close proximity to high-density living and working environments, including things like I said before, like billboards, chimneys, silos, church steeples, these areas that aren't currently regulated for the most part in municipal code. So with many of these instances happening in the municipal right-of-way or on land governed by municipalities, you may want to consider addressing these impacts, like I said before, that they would have on intersection or driveway site distances, but also for ADA compliance. And if they are trenching, putting fiber underground, that can have effects on the tree roots and systems like that in ground. Okay, so Charles is going to take over from here to discuss jurisdictional issues.
Well, thanks, Kristen, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody. The jurisdictional issues are probably one of the most complex areas of land use that I've experienced in my career. It's really an area for those who are willing to take on a challenge of understanding the federal and state laws, case laws, state regulations, and state agency docket decisions, and of course, municipal authorities. This is an area which requires a great deal of time to get familiarized with the background to the regulations and the laws. You can go to the next slide. We've tried to summarize the basic laws and regulations and docket decisions that affect who's governing the small wireless facilities as well as distributed antenna systems. And distributed antenna systems are basically the amplifier antennas that are used to beam small wireless transmissions into large convention centers or buildings in which wireless is going to be made accessible, primarily because the higher frequency for the small cell transmissions oftentimes don't go through buildings because of the ultra high wavelengths that are being used. So the distributed antenna systems, which are amplifiers, are part of the analysis that's presented here. 5 basic players are the Federal Communications Commission, the Connecticut Siting Council, Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, and of course, municipalities and the Connecticut Department of Transportation. The issues really vary enormously as to who's in charge. The FCC is in charge of the overall broadband spectrum services and licensing, as well as the radio frequency exposure standards that apply. Those are not negotiable at the municipal level, nor are they negotiable at the state level. Those are established at the federal level with input, as we can talk about later. The siting of towers, when a tower is taller than a building, and you're talking about towers of 100, 200, 499 feet, those fall under the jurisdiction of the Connecticut Siting Council. When small cells are technically a tower, but they're a unique tower, which are really designed to be put in the range of anywhere from 20 to 50, 60 feet above ground. So technically, while a small cell antenna is a tower, it is treated much differently because of the way it's designed and what its purpose is. So when a small cell antenna is above a building and it's functioning like a tower and it's higher than the building itself in the surrounding area, then the Siting Council has jurisdiction. But when it's on a building, such as the side of a building or above a building, but not higher than the surrounding area, then the municipality has jurisdiction. When it's a small cell is put on a electric pole or a pole owned by AT&T, then the Public Utility Regulatory Authority has jurisdiction. But when that same small cell is put on a decorative pole owned by the municipality, then that would be under the jurisdiction of the municipality. So that's an important thing to understand in terms of siting. The other thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to the right-of-way, there are 2 big players, the municipalities and the state of Connecticut, primarily the Department of Transportation with road encroachment permits. So depending upon whether a small cell is in the right-of-way of a local government or of a state DOT will determine the jurisdiction when the small cell has an impact on the right-of-way, independent of PURA's authority of the utility pole. And these subtleties are very important in any given case. You can go to the next slide. Any progress there?
Sorry, it's not going to the next slide yet.
This is the,
there we go.
This is the advantage of having high-speed wireless is you don't wait microseconds like we just did. Another thing to keep in mind in terms of these issues that are presented here is the right-of-way considerations at the bottom of the page. And when it comes to right-of-way, if it's in a, excuse me, there was a little phone call there. If it's in the right-of-way of a municipal government road, then the municipality has the jurisdiction. 86% of the roads in Western Connecticut, in terms of road miles, are municipal road miles. It's only 14% of all road miles in Western Connecticut are actually under the jurisdiction of the State Department of Transportation. However, that does not preclude local governments having a role through the state road encroachment permit process, or even in a collaborative way, because there are specific laws that authorize local governments to work with DOT in developing strategies for the use of the right-of-way beneficial to the municipality. So one should never think that because a municipality has an advisory role, that advisory role is trivial. And particularly in the case of siting decisions made by the Connecticut Siting Council in the areas of location preferences, where the municipalities have the right to establish location preferences. Those are advisory rights, but those are extremely significant advisory rights. And we'll talk about that further to the extent that which we found very few municipalities are properly exercising their full range of authorities over small cell wireless facilities, not to mention towers. And we can move on. So we have 4 basic strategies that we've developed in this last year of work on this task force. And it's been quite an extensive amount of work that's gone into it. I dare say there's no study like this ever done in Connecticut until you're looking at it today. The actual study, if you can see my picture here, this is the picture that I'm holding up of the actual report that we're summarizing. It's some 180 pages of detail, and you're getting it in about an hour and some minutes here today. License agreements, rights of way ordinances, zoning ordinance, and the municipal ordinance strategy are the regulatory and business strategies that really make sense. And each one has its virtues and its vices, and which ones will be appropriate in the sequence of developments in any given town will depend upon a variety of factors, including the urbanized character of a community, how developed it is already in terms of the telecommunication industry, and also the interest in promoting 5G services. We'll go into the licensing agreement first. Our task force came up with 2 basic strategies of dealing with the development of wired and/or wireless telecommunication services. The column on the left is the approach taken for those interested in leveraging their municipal gain authority. A municipal gain authority, for those who are not familiar with it, is a statutorily provided authority to have the right to put up conduit on utility poles or in the underground conduit within the municipal or state right-of-way. This authority has been upheld by case law last year in the Superior Court, and that case has been declared to be valid because the appeal period is over. And as a result, this is a very significant advantage that municipalities have for those municipalities that want to take an affirmative approach to control the way wired or wireless telecommunication services are provided, with the bottom line going from the top where the options exist to the bottom where the strategies are realized, and with the ultimate goal being to provide smart cities, smart homes, emergency preparedness services at a level that they perhaps do not exist, and the IoT is the Internet of Things. So I would say on the left side, what we're talking about, if we like the game of football, is what I call the offense. It's the opportunity of a municipality to move forward with a strategic vision that has economic development, educational benefits, and municipal benefits by taking a proactive approach. The right side is what I call the defense in a football game. We're going to find, whether we like it or not, in many areas, that the telecommunications industry, given the franchise they've been given and the authority they've been given by the FCC, they will be coming in and installing small cell wireless facilities where strategically it makes most sense. And so where that happens will depend in large measure on the licensing strategies that municipalities undertake. And I need to emphasize that all of the telecommunication industry is using licensing as their basic transactional vehicle for working on financial bilateral relationships with municipalities. So option one will only happen on the left side, the municipal gain, for municipalities that choose to take a proactive approach. The licensing on the right side is only going to happen as the telecommunication industry determines that your municipality is within their short-term strategic plan. Wired and wireless both exist on either of these options, and the choice really will depend upon how the municipality chooses to mix wired and wireless services. You can go to the next slide. Now let's talk about the practical. What is municipal gain just from a visual point of view? On a telephone pole, there's overlashing that has occurred. There's support wires that exist between telephone and electric poles, and overlashing of the fiber optic cable, which is basically the backhaul for all small cell wireless facilities, must be put up through overlashing in order to get the municipal gain at no cost. The other option, if you look at the bottom there, is that underground conduit may have a vacant space in that blue cavity there. There's no fiber optic in that particular cavity. So that could be licensed out if that happened to be a conduit that was provided by the municipality. Or alternatively, there can be the licensing out of the actual fiber, because in normal approaches, when fiber optic is put in, if you put in 288 fibers, you put in not only enough fibers to meet your needs, but you always have redundancy. One, because of breakage that may happen, but also it allows you, because the fiber is not that expensive compared to the actual construction work, it gives you the ability to license out that fiber. So that's what the telecommunication industry does, but it's also what a municipality can do. So whether the municipal gain is underground or whether it's above ground on a utility pole, both options are within the authority of municipalities to undertake and to actually use for their own benefit or to license. And this is a key thing. The telecommunications industry fought that in the court case and they lost. The municipalities have the authority to make their own municipal gain available to other providers, internet service providers. And that's the key, internet service providers, not public service companies, which are the AT&Ts of the world. So to the extent that the municipality wants to promote the internet service providers to raise the level of transmission characteristics, fiber to the home, for example, it's all within the authority of local government if they choose. And you can go to the next slide. So a little bit about our process. This was not something done overnight, not even in a week, not even in a month. An enormous amount of energy went into looking at what we consider the best licensing strategies across the country. After looking at all of them at the municipal level and many of the telecommunication providers' standard license agreement, we came up with what we considered to be the 10 best that exist out there in the industry. And of those, we identified about 101 discrete elements that we felt need to go into any good licensing agreement. As a result of that, our analysis, which is on the right-hand side, goes over in various chapters the concepts that we've developed for licensing. Chapter 7 in particular is the most relevant in this instance, which is really the case for municipal licensing and the advantages. And in doing it, though, I will say the licensing agreements in any given town are not necessarily going to be what they are in Boston, Baltimore, Stanford, or New York. It's going to be very specific to what the needs of that community are. And it's also, since it's a bilateral relationship, it's going to be driven to a large extent by the telecommunication providers and what their minimum standards will be. We actually do have resources that provide links to all of that, and they can be made available for those who are interested. You can go to the next slide. So, licensing really is the key to good fiscal management. There is no way to actually deal with the telecommunication industry without a licensing agreement, particularly when they're going to use municipal infrastructure, whether that be land, buildings, the municipal right-of-way, decorative poles, you name the number of things that could be there. But it's not merely a financial tool. It also allows us to deal with issues such as the multiple pole user problem, because even if we have one company come in, there are multiple telecommunication companies, and without a licensing agreement to determine how the multiple companies use the same utility pole, the same decorative pole, the same municipal building, and under what emergency procedures they're going to be notifying you when a disaster happens and the antenna has fallen down onto the middle of a highway, which gets into who's responsible for maintenance repair on municipal structures. There's a whole range of issues, and these issues really do require a license agreement. It's a basic prerequisite for doing business. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, the other one is, of course, the municipal right-of-way ordinance. Our own analysis, we've looked at all the municipal road encroachment ordinances in Western Connecticut. And of course, none of them deal with this issue. None of our municipal ordinances on road encroachment are yet up to speed with the issues that are emerging with the 5G telecommunications revolution. So we see a significant number of issues that need to be addressed. We've identified 16 discrete elements that need to be added to what we consider to be the current best road encroachment ordinance, which happened to be New Canaan. We use them as the model, so you can take your hat and take a bow for that New Canaan on this one. But even though you were the best in our opinion, as a starting point, the number of things that need to be addressed in a municipal ordinance for right-of-way is significantly more than is currently the practice here in our region. And I dare say this issue will be ubiquitous across the state of Connecticut. So we've provided in our final report a model right-of-way ordinance. We've also in Chapter 5 discussed the case for a municipal right-of-way ordinance in the public safety issues, the American Disability Act issues, and many other issues, which we'll momentarily talk about. We can go to the next slide. When you put in small cell wireless facilities, and you saw the images that Kristen showed earlier, there is a very good chance, regardless of what PURA's authority is, that those will intersect with municipal authorities yet to be realized, but that should be adopted, dealing with intersection and driveway sight lines. Guy wires that are put on monopoles, for example, at a shorter level, could very well interfere with pedestrian access or American Disability Act access issues. And of course, buried infrastructure is a significant issue, particularly when it affects street trees, sewer lines, water lines. In a very precise inventory of what we have buried within our rights of way is a critical piece for the long-term development of the 5G or even the wired internet world, which has nothing to do with wireless, just the wired internet world. We need this municipal inventory. And whether we go wired or wireless depends on wired backhaul. There is no such thing as the 5G wireless revolution without a wired backhaul connectivity. And of course, the highway safety hazards also exist because these can be put on intersection signalization systems and other locations which could interfere with sightline issues and intersections, particularly with the ancillary equipment, that 28 cubic foot refrigerator that Kristen showed earlier, which gives you a good sense of some of the problems. You can go on to the next slide there. Now for our most favorite, one of our most favorite subject matters for some of you. I see Hiram Peck is on the line, which I'm glad to see you're here, Hiram. We haven't talked in a long time. We did something a little above and beyond on this one. We not only reviewed about 20 municipal zoning ordinances nationwide, but we actually reviewed all 167 municipalities with zoning in Connecticut and systematically determined exactly how they're being handled across Connecticut, because we think this, as far as our own town planners in our region, felt that the zoning strategy may be the first one to be activated because it's the one that most municipalities have been most comfortable with over the last 25 years. So in doing this, of course, we've reviewed the federal and state laws and case law on small cell wireless facilities in order to come up with what we believe are some pretty, I think, important recommendations here. Chapter 4 of our report does deal with the zoning regulations. And for those who only like the one-page solution to the world's problems, Appendix D gives you the 10 key things that local zoning commissions can do to comply with the FCC 2018 rules. I recommend that one because it gives you a quick take on what the issues are. We'll go over it momentarily. I guess you can hit the next slide here. So the 2018 Federal Communication rules had 7 basic provisions that are significant. And it really is focusing, when we used to talk about towers, 500-foot towers, 200-foot, 100-foot, 80-foot towers, we're now talking about them on the top of utility poles and buildings. So the entire program is switching from the Siting Council to PURA and municipalities if we look at the longer term perspective. That's the big switch. And it's not that Siting Council doesn't have jurisdiction. If a monopole is put up and it's independent of utility system poles, then it would be under the Siting Council. But an enormous number, as Kristen showed, fall within municipal jurisdiction as we're going now. The reasonable viewshed standards. So what does that mean, really? According to the Ninth Circuit Court, reasonable means technically feasible. And until the FCC figures out how to come up with an objective standard, because we know FCC is very prompt about trying to overcome court rulings. Until that happens, or if it doesn't happen, technically feasible is the standard by which viewshed standards must be reviewed. If they're technically feasible to be done, then the court has ruled it acceptable. We've talked about shot clock rules. And of course, the key thing to keep in mind, the shot clock rules are not really just for zoning. Anything that requires a local permit requires adherence to the shot clock standard. And so what it's forcing municipalities to do, and it may be the town planner that takes the lead, is to recognize that all permits must be completed within the 60-day period. There's a 10-day period for the complete application, for the application to be deemed complete. But after that, there's a 60-day period in which all permits must be approved. And of course, the applicant has the right then to go to federal court if they so choose. One of the things I tell people, though, of course, it's called the grumble line. The grumble line is that line which, when you exceed it, people then decide to go and perhaps exercise their legal rights. But when they're on the grumble line is some line beyond the legal authority of a municipality, but not that far beyond the authority where they do anything more than grumble and they don't go forward with litigation. And so we know to a large extent that applicants try to work with communities to do it. But from a technical and legal point of view, the grumble line doesn't exist legally. It just exists in terms of the bilateral relationships and working relations that can exist when two parties are trying to succeed in one objective. One thing to keep in mind, small cells can be placed on government buildings. Indeed, if a government building is currently being used for small cell wireless facilities, the FCC has ruled that you cannot prohibit them from being placed on a municipal building if they're already being used for that purpose. That's a very key piece of information for those who are thinking about prohibiting small cells on certain buildings. You first want to investigate how you're currently allowing them in the first place. And of course, Kristen has talked about undergrounding. It's important to understand that undergrounding is not to say you can't underground certain aspects of the small cell initiative. And that would be like the fiber conduit that goes for the backhaul of the transmission. That can certainly be undergrounded. And you can underground the ancillary equipment, although technically it raises issues with some of the problems that emerge with undergrounding of ancillary equipment where you need certain types of dehumidification for that equipment that may not be possible underground. But the entire undergrounding concept was deemed to be a way of saying, we don't want wireless, all we want is wired. And the FCC has declared that that is not within the purview of state or local governments. Likewise with the spacing, as long as these antennas can be spaced to be able to have a continuous transmission along corridors, highway corridors, then that type of restriction may not be an issue. Particularly in the case of historic buildings, some spacings may be acceptable as long as the spacing is not prohibitive in an essential prohibition by dint of putting the spacing so far apart that it doesn't work at all. So there can be adjustments in terms of putting an antenna in a way that it doesn't affect the compatibility with the historic district. There's wiggle room here, but ultimately, if the intent is to prohibit, then we'd be running up against FCC rules that don't allow that. So we can go to the next slide. Now, our analysis of the current zoning practices was kind of an eye-opener. Right now, the current regulations really are woefully out of date. Almost all of them reflect the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which was a focus on towers. So only about 71% of our towns in Connecticut encourage co-location. Focusing is on the towers, not on small cell wireless facilities. Naturally, because all of the towns in Connecticut have not yet addressed small cell wireless facilities. Surprisingly enough, only 62% require an alternatives analysis. Why here, not there? The concept of why here, not there, the alternative analysis is actually supported by Connecticut statutes allowing municipalities to look at siting preferences, and alternatives analysis is part of that process. So the question is, what about the other 38% of the towns in Connecticut that haven't actually considered that? Well, there's a number of reasons I believe this is happening. One is the complexity of the regulations that exist and that many of them don't fully understand. In fact, there are municipalities that don't believe they have any authority, if you read their zoning regulations, over towers, period. So we have those problems, which is an education problem for our Planning and Zoning Commission members and our town planners for that matter. So location preferences, again, the statutes authorize municipalities to do it, yet we only have 60% of the towns in Connecticut that are actually doing it. Now, viewshed analysis, again, held up by the Ninth Circuit Court as a legitimate authority of local governments, and only 53% of the towns in Connecticut are doing it. Viewsheds are not simply a artifact of looking at towers. They're also an artifact of looking at small cell wireless facilities, because these are things that actually will go right through our historic districts, our village districts, and many other parts of our communities where we're concerned about the visual clutter that Kristen showed earlier. You can hit the next slide. Now, I know there are some people very interested in the issues of radio frequency emission reports. And I would underscore to a lot of people here, and there's a lot of misconceptions going on about radio frequency exposure issues, and also misconceptions about what municipalities can and cannot do. I think it's important for everybody to understand that municipalities have the authority to verify that radio frequency emissions reports meet FCC standards. Only 53% of our towns in Connecticut actually require an emission report. That right there, for those who are interested in it, is a major public relations problem for those who have been listening to the kinds of issues that Representative Michelle brought up in the Stanford hearing last fall. And I think there are legitimate concerns that people have raised, but I think one of the things is a municipality has much more authority to undertake training and awareness building by requiring these types of reports. 45% specify high wireless facilities. Now, it looks like, so we have, I just stopped talking for a moment because my internet was unstable. We're not on 5G at the moment. Anyway, there is no ability to limit the heights of small cell wireless facilities in any other way than as FCC has established them. One thing I would recommend is the annual radio frequency verification report. Only 12% roughly of our towns in Connecticut require such a report. Now, why is that important? The reason for it is that over time, as more and more co-location of small cell wireless facilities are placed on a telephone pole, like you saw in the earlier picture that Kristen showed, unless a report is required to be done on a routine basis, we do not know what the synergistic effects or the additive effects are of those radio frequency exposures. So that's a very important thing. Now, one thing I will also mention, because we've looked at case law on this, about 9% of all the towns prohibit towers in protected open space. There's case law in Connecticut that shows that municipalities have the authority to prohibit towers, and that would be small cells in the same way, because the word towers technically covers small cells under Connecticut law from protected open space. This comes out of case law in Connecticut a number of years ago. And for those who think they don't have that authority, there is case law that supports it when it is protected open space. You can hit the next slide. And of course, surprising as it is, 16% of all the Connecticut towns have no regulations about telecommunications at all. And the reason for that are multifold, of course. Some that are in rural areas that don't think they'll ever see a telecommunications tower, which is not quite true. And also municipalities that have explicitly said in their regulations, they don't think they have the authority to regulate telecommunications towers. So there clearly is an educational role here that's needed at the municipal level for municipalities and planning and zoning commissions to understand that their authorities. Okay, you can go. Now, this is just a comparison of the findings for the state of Connecticut versus Western Connecticut. I'm only going to point out one point here. Our region, Western Connecticut, the setting, the location preferences were woefully out of sync with what the rest of the state is doing. And of course, the rest of the state is woefully out of sync with what the statutes authorize. So we really have we're in a frontier in which everything that is going on with telecommunications regulation at the zoning level is 25 years out of date. Every single one of these, in my opinion, should say 100%. And so what we have is a real opportunity to move forward with some strategic planning and zoning administration improvements. You can hit the next slide. Now, we decided to look at what are the current practices, first choice and second choice. Many municipalities have from 2 to one municipality, I think, had 10 siting preferences. That's really getting quite a bit. But given that there was a range from 2 to 11, and mostly it was about 4 or 5 choices per town that had them, we found that the most common choice was on existing buildings and structures. Now remember, that choice was done during the era of towers. So now we're in the era of small cell wireless facilities. And so you'd say, wow, this is perfect. The small cell wireless facility priorities are exactly lined up with the current zoning. Well, I hate to tell you that was only done as a way to distract the industry from going to towers. What we need now, because this focuses on the buildings and structures, is an entirely new set of priorities that focus on how they're put on them in terms of the micro scale issues of concealment and the placement of them so that they fall in with the design standards that we would like in a whole range of locations. So while in theory it looks like we're lining up very well, the practice of it is that focus on existing buildings and structures was really a statement of don't put up all these big towers, put them down lower. But now the whole game has shifted, and so now we need to shift as well to understand the subtleties of micro scale design. You can hit the next slide. Now here's what the least preferred choices are in Connecticut. And as you can see at the bottom, The least preferred is new towers in residential zones, R for residential, and of course, new towers in any zone for that matter, if you look at what's going on. And of course, about 3 or 4 up the line is municipal land, is another thing that some do not. And of course, there are towns that do put it as a priority the other way, but this is the assessment of all the 169 towns. And these are the least preferred, and choices ranging from number 5 to number 8 on their preference list. Took a little bit of time to do this, but this gives you a sense of what currently is going on in Connecticut. You can hit the next slide. So, do location preferences matter? Yes, they absolutely do. And I think the most important thing now is that very few of our towns are focused across the state in establishing small cell standards that focus on concealment in buildings or on buildings or in other fashions, including some of the concealment techniques that Kristen showed for the National Capital Planning Commission. So microaesthetic issues are going to be much more significant than they were under the tower arena that we had before. But I think one of the most important things is the bottom one, and that is that we're going to really need to revise the zoning regulations in Connecticut. And it's really going to be, a technical assistance program to work through what will make most sense in any given community to address the 5G revolution. You can hit the next slide. Kristen, are you there? Okay, thank you. So there's the 10 key areas which we've identified that really become the most important are really in this little table here. Explicit siting preferences focus on the small cell arena, ensuring that alternative analysis standards are incorporated into zoning, prohibiting small cells in protected open space, identifying municipal buildings that are suitable. Not all buildings are going to be suitable, but if you already have buildings that have them, that may be already, the game may be over. One thing that, because of the shot clock, we believe that the zoning permit process may be the only real way when we deal with the shot clock standards, making it very difficult on a timetable to use a special permit approach. And that, in many respects, has to do with developing more sophisticated and more specific zoning permit procedures that obviate the need for special permit procedures, but having them embodied within a zoning permit process. Because the FCC wants objective standards on the viewshed side, there is an objective standard issue that comes up with explicit approval criteria. The explicit approval criteria is going to be very significant if there are a lot of areas of wiggle room in the decision-making process. That could be an area which is challenged. We believe that the radio frequency emission reports is a critical component. Given the concerns that have been raised by people in the public, it'll be part of any educational campaign. And also design standards. There's 2 ways that goes. One is the design guidelines, which are a little bit like a village district or historic preservation district having design guidelines. The other is a catalog of poles and standards for placement, that can be used. In fact, there are some municipalities like Boston that have a pole catalog. You pick 16 different poles they've approved, just like the National Capital Planning Commission, and you can only have one of the approved poles in any given location. They may have specific ones that are applied. Historic preservation guidelines are also going to be affected. And of course, we talked about the reasonable viewshed regs. So I think that may be it. You can go on to the next slide, but I think that might be it, Kristen. Or no, there is one final one. And I think we've pretty much covered this. as far as the issues that we've gone over here. And I think we will go over just to the next one here. Good point. Finally, the Municipal Task Force dealt with the municipal ordinance concept, and we looked at a whole range of municipal ordinances. And you'll see in our chapter 6 that we went into that case for the municipal ordinance. And you can go on to the next slide. The municipal ordinance basically is going to be something that a municipality adopts when they're really organized and ready to go. Initially, we think a zoning permit, a zoning process is going to be the first step in the process. But as this becomes more involved and municipalities recognize it's not just the zoning process, it's the right-of-way process, it's the building permit process, it's the plumbing and electrical permits. There's a whole range of permits, and anything that deals with meetings or hearings or reviews, even radio frequency compliance reports, all of those have to be organized. And this leads to the municipal ombudsman's role. Who is going to coordinate everything to get everything done within the 60-day shot clock standard? And of course, who's going to unify all the fee schedules so there's one set of fee schedules that the applicant knows for every kind of aspect of the work? And of course, having a municipal ordinance also supports the long-term licensing of small cells. These licensing agreements are normally for 5 to 10 years. And that's more than the lifetime of most chief elected officials in high turnover municipalities. So as an interim strategy, policy approaches that mimic a municipal ordinance are useful. But over the longer term, a municipal ordinance is an extremely valuable tool when we have long-term relationships. And these long-term relationships are expected to last for years and years, 10, 20, and more, depending upon where the technology goes. I mean, I can dare say, unless we all get into some technologies that we've not yet heard of, the chances are we're going to be seeing the need for long-term municipal ordinances to deal with structuring how all of the local government programs interact and integrate with each other. And that's the virtue of a municipal ordinance. Okay, I think you can hit the next slide.
Okay, so the last few slides, we're going to summarize what the task force has achieved. So in the final report, it identifies the critical strategies that any municipality needs to consider when small cell wireless facilities are expanded into their communities. Those were just outlined by Charles right before me, those 4. And by identifying those key issues, the task force has enabled a more consistent regional approach to 5G development that should be in the interest of economic development concerns, but also in a more rational approach to a wide range of land use, environmental, and public safety issues this new technology raises. The task force has been mindful of the need to balance the costs of 5G deployment and with its anticipated benefits. Our society has never been more dependent on wired and wireless communication services than it has in the last 8 months for remote work and from remote school. The task force gathered input from a wide range of subject matter experts in the legislative, telecommunications, and regulatory and land use planning fields. All the major telecommunications companies have been consulted during our deliberations, as well as key stakeholders in the executive offices of Governor Lamont's numerous agencies that oversee 5G deployment in Connecticut. We believe that the task force report, if implemented across the 18 municipalities in WestCOG, or even if it gets implemented across all 169 municipalities in the state, will simplify the regulatory review process at the local level so that telecommunications companies can give the benefit of 5G, and it can be realized in a more timely fashion for our residents. So finally, the task force report provides a comprehensive list of gaps and improvements areas for municipalities that are focusing on developing transportation strategies. The first being improving online business services. The second, improving efficiency for manufacturing that requires high-speed communication for transactional and business operations. And the third is to address issues of the digital divide that remain unaddressed by current levels of wired and wireless broadband. Okay, so the last slide is the municipal challenge. We've outlined 3 of the main challenges remaining for municipalities to undergo. So the first would be that first option that Charlie went through, and he had people develop business strategies to take advantage of the municipal gain option that was upheld by the Connecticut courts, and to adopt a licensing strategy for municipal infrastructure that the telecommunications industry anticipates using. The second key challenge is to reevaluate the land use, public safety, and environmental standards adopted for telecommunications towers in light of the significantly different impacts that small cells will have on compared to towers. So finally, the success of these initiatives require an important commitment to public education, not only to address many of the misconceptions about public health issues with radio frequency exposures, but also to raise awareness of the wide range of benefits that the 5G service can offer to businesses, which include remote education, remote work, telemedicine, robotics, intelligent transportation systems, among many others. So thank you again to the task force members who committed to developing this coordinated strategy. I saw a few of you have joined the webinar today, so I'd like to thank you again. This wouldn't have been possible without your help. You can find the final report on the WestCOG website if you'd like to delve into any of these subject matters deeper. But we are also available for any questions today. So it looks like we have about 20 minutes to answer any questions that you have, to make sure that everyone can be heard and there's no overlapping. If you can just raise your hand and I can call on you and we can have questions and answers that way. Okay, so I see Lauren Witten.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if we would be able to get a video of this, or a digital version of this.
Yes, so it is going to be available on, sorry about that. It's going to be available on our website in a few days. We did record it, so you'll be able to go through it.
That's great. And have a lot of towns found that these devices are going into the polls? I mean, is that really that common? Because a lot of, I'm just curious, because a lot of the polls that are, like, I've been Enfield and we have a lot of really nice polls in our downtown area, and you know, they're historic looking, and do they come in and just retrofit, or do they come in and actually take the pole out and replace it?
Charlie, do you want to take?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening is, first of all, they're being put in areas where there's the greatest demand, and where the strategically they make the most sense, which are the urbanized areas of Connecticut, also the I-95 corridor into New York is an example of that. So in a suburban or rural area, you're not going to see any activity with the 5G initiative in the short term. It's going to take a little longer. And whether they put it in an aesthetic way or not will depend upon two things. If it's on a utility pole governed by Public Utility Regulatory Authority, there will be a minimal impact that you will have, your community will have on it. However, if it's a utility pole which you own, or which is under your jurisdiction, a decorative pole, then you have 100% authority to influence how they're put in. But without a regulation or guidance, it'll be a first impression issue. And that's one of the reasons for this whole our webinar, is to emphasize the need to start planning for what could happen. And really, I see the urban centers of our state being the first ones that need to start thinking about this, or the transportation corridors, where some municipalities are on major corridors, even if they're suburban or rural. In those corridors of transportation also are important areas where they may be deployed as well.
Thank you. That's helpful.
So we did also receive a question in the chat box, which you are all welcome to submit questions that way too. So this question is from Nate Hogrand from New Haven. He says, we currently have a section in our ordinance that covers regulations of wireless communications, which currently does not allow for equipment, including antennas, to be located within 10 feet from the roof edge. Therefore, a variance is required and has been obtained in 5 cases thus far to allow 5G use on the facade or closer to the roof edge. Since anything within the right-of-way is outside the purview of zoning, we are looking to create a master contract. Any insight there, or any other municipalities that you are aware of doing a similar process?
A master contract I'm not sure if I understand the issue about the master contract. If you could clarify that, Nate, maybe we can unmute him on this point.
So it seems like they...
Nate, I've just unmuted you. If you want to speak, that'd be, if you could clarify what you mean by the master contract.
Yes, so instead of going the route of an ordinance, because like I mentioned, it wouldn't cover anything in the right of way, which would be like utility poles and things of that nature. We were looking to create a master contract for all the major providers, whether it be, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, whatever it may be, that they would all have to follow as far as aesthetics go, limiting placements, such as we don't want these things located on like the New Haven Green, for example, so restricting it from historic districts, for example, something we've been looking at. We're just looking at going that route as opposed to doing anything in the ordinance itself.
Yes, I mean, basically the difference between a master contract, the license agreement, and a real estate contract are really degrees of emphasis. It really depends on what is the leading edge purpose. And so a master contract is one way to do it. There's no question. That's really like a licensing agreement. In fact, the telecommunication industry is looking to licensing agreements. That's what AT&T expects. But a master contract concept is a legitimate approach. And in fact, it's right on line with the licensing agreement. These are just different business terms for the same basic objective. But bear in mind that the right-of-way or the road encroachment ordinance concept is a concept which establishes some baseline rules. So if you have a master contract, which is a good thing, it's not necessarily independent of having a road encroachment ordinance. Which comes first is really a question of what your immediate needs are, but the two can go hand in glove.
Okay, thank you.
I will say to the issue of road encroachment ordinances, most municipalities across the country have been focused on the zoning ordinance as their primary vehicle. In the Northeast, there's a number of municipalities that have focused on the right-of-way ordinance, some in the greater Boston area. And of course, many of them have just gone straight to the licensing agreement. And I will say in some places, such as in Baltimore, they've gone with a real estate contract. So there are multiple strategies here. It's not necessarily, just limited to licensing agreement, even though that is the more common term used within the industry.
Are there any other questions? Give people one more minute to submit any if they would like to.
I'd be very interested, with Hiram Peck on the line. Hiram, what your town is doing on the whole telecommunication industry issues, and whether there's anything you could share with us having worked with you many years ago, I highly regard your opinions.
Well, Charlie, thank you very much for the kind words, but I don't know that we really have come to grips with it yet. I look forward to reading through your report carefully. I think there are a lot of us that are trying to make a decision or determination as to what the potential impact can be, especially on our downtowns and where design is a concern to us. You know, one of the things that I thought about when you were talking about the different types of poles, for example, and if you said that the town wanted to see one particular type of pole, whether that would mean that other utilities, other carriers would be sort of locked into that same pole, or whether they would come in with a different pole, whether you'd end up with 2 or 3 different sets of poles. So I think there are all kinds of design questions like that, as well as the processing, I think, that are really important. So I look forward to reading through your report carefully so I can absorb a lot more of it than I was able to get today. Thank you.
Well, that's a very good issue that you brought up, Hiram. One thing I will say is that if a company comes in like Crown Castle, which is an infrastructure provider, they enable the small cell industry to come in, and then they lease out their antennas to multiple providers. When they come in, they will actually enable 3 or 4 providers to use the same small cell antenna. And the result is less clutter. But there are some companies, and I better not mention which ones they are right now, that will not put their antenna on the same pole as one of their competitors. And that, in my opinion, is a significant concern because it minimizes the ability of a municipality to control their design of their downtown, and because they want their own pole. So that's going to be an issue. I mean, in an ideal world, I would bring in the infrastructure providers who lease it out to the industry, you know, the public service companies like the AT&Ts of the world and Verizon's, because then you can actually integrate. But that kind of planning is we're going to have to scratch our head a bit about how that can be done in a free market world, because it's going to be difficult. But to the extent that some of them will co-locate and are happy to do so, that is actually to our advantage. But we just have to be mindful of the fact that not all of the players work together well.
I think that's exactly right, Charlie. The only other thing that I would add to that is, and that's very helpful, is that I'm sure that some of the other towns, especially the smaller ones, are probably getting some pushback about 5G in general. And I think that's something we've really got to come to grips with. And a lot of times our residents don't want to hear the fact that, you know, we have no control over it. So I think that looking carefully at what your recommendations are and how best to deal with it and getting the public at least aware of what the options are is going to be very helpful. And so thank you again.
I agree with that, Hiram. I think it's something that both Kristen and I have been discussing for quite some time. I think I mentioned in a previous COG meeting that one of our biggest challenges is that issue of education. And I think, you know, Kristen, you may want to speak to it too, because I think it's the road to success has to go through the door of education. Wouldn't you say, Kristen?
Yes, I think that's a crucial component from what we've heard from people from the public already, is the misunderstanding of frequency emissions, how it works, the effects on humans or on insects, what the differences are there. So that'll be a crucial component. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more questions, but feel free to email Charles or I, and we are happy to answer any if they come up post webinar. And the webinar will be available on our website in a few days once we are able to upload it. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.